try and give you a hand, Janet. We're going to let folks in. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and for making this work. The primary thing I would like us to talk through today, in addition to any of the other business, first we have to approve the meeting minutes from the prior meeting, and then there's the Charlie Young and Lincoln Heineman have developed, per your request from last meeting, a breakdown of all of the costs above and below the line between the town and the schools, and have broken out, how much money is spent above the line on certain costs, how much money how much money is assessed to the schools for services provided by the town, and then how many town services are provided to the school, what percentage of town services are provided to the schools that is not assessed, and vice versa, right? For example, this then kind of breaks down the cost of certain things above the line, if they were to be broken out between town and schools versus allocated directly. And we've done that for all of these. With that said, it's not recommended that all of them obviously be taken out and below the line. For example, there are things like debt service, which doesn't make any sense to split debt service. It doesn't make any sense to split pension. It doesn't make any of those. None of those things are, but for certain areas, and I'll let Charlie kind of take the lead here once that time comes. But first, I do think you need to approve the minutes. And so,
when were those provided with the committee with us?
I never noticed.
Charlie, do you have a sense of when those? I think when the meeting agenda was posted, the minutes were
Yes,
on.
it likely went on there when the agenda was posted. Yeah, if you have suggestions, if you want to change anything, we can hold off on approving.
We can also hold off on approving if you have time to review.
There's the capital.
Oh, and then Janet, so I'm going to mute Janet first while she gets settled in here.
Great. So yeah, to answer your question, Jesse, we could make a minor modification now if you have one for the vote.
I never saw them. That's why I'm asking.
Understood.
Well, why don't we postpone them till your next meeting then?
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I mean, there are multiple emails that came out from Tiffany about this meeting, and maybe it was in one of them. Maybe I don't know. I just never saw it. So
we can hold them.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we just send it out again.
It was posted with the meeting materials. So Jesse, if you'd like us to send out the minutes in addition to posting them with the meeting materials, we can do that. If you want any help locating the meeting materials, let us know. We can show you how to get to those.
No, I can find those. I just didn't. Okay, fine. No, all right.
Okay. Charlie, do you want to kind of walk through the let me promote Janet here. I can't promote her. Nicole,
I think it'll have to be, Nicole will have to do it. Please promote Janet Gelbert.
Thank you.
Make sure Janet's promoted. There we go.
Okay, fine. My apologies. I just never noticed it was a Zoom meeting and I was sitting here with it on my phone.
That's okay.
That is okay.
Okay, thank you, Chaz. So, subcommittee members, last time you all met and discussed, there was a request, I actually think it was by another ENRSC member, for a graphical illustration which is not what I'm going to show you, and you'll have to bear with me because we'd like to produce some graphics that illustrate this as well. But a graphical illustration of the school costs, town and school costs, as they sort of exist truly and not just as they go through the split. We have some helpful information in the budget book on this, but my goal was to lay it out in as clear a fashion as I possibly can. So I'm going to share my screen. It's a blizzard of numbers, but I hope you'll follow along with me. And we'll provide the data, provide this table after the fact, put it in the packet so you can look at it. I should introduce myself for members of the public. I'm the Assistant Town Administrator for Finance, Charlie Young, and I help Melissa with the operating budget. So what I have done here, in as simplified a fashion as I can, again, understand blizzard of numbers, pay attention to the column labels here. I've taken the town meeting budget as it exists in total, $419 million. In these three columns, I have broken down the shared costs. So in column J are the shared costs that currently exist above the line. So if you were to look at the town school split, you would see the total revenue, and then you would see shared costs above the line deducted immediately after that. And those total 177 million you'll see in the budget book. And they include things like pensions, like the reserve fund, debt service, as Chaz mentioned. And so that's column J. And under column K, we have all of the shared costs that live below the line. So for example, if information technology goes up in a year, the schools are assessed for 50% of that below the line. And these are the costs that are all shared below the line. And then there are all of these costs, which we include on a table in the budget book, some of which are acknowledged and some of which are not, that are either within the town budget or within the shared costs. So for example, there's about $150,000 of expenditure out of the human resources budget that is estimated to be on behalf of the schools. And if you were to scroll down, you'll see that, for example, $11 million of pensions are estimated to be associated with the schools. So we've taken all three of these columns, things that live above the line and below the line, and these sort of, I wouldn't call them hidden, but they're reported in the school end of your report costs that are in the town budget or in the shared costs. And we have disaggregated them across these three categories: final shared costs, final town, and final school. And so, as you can see, for example, the $150,000 that's in the HR department that's estimated to be on behalf of the schools carries over into this column for final school. And so these three columns are sort of, again, not as exists in the budget, and as Chaz said, not necessarily what is recommended going forward, change the budget this way. Is just for the sake of illustration. These three columns represent the total actual share of town, school, and final shared costs. So I'll scroll down a little bit. This is by department, but we have also broken this out down here by category, if that's a little easier to look at, which we can look at in a moment. But what you'll notice is in the category of final shared costs, I thought the columns were going to be frozen so you could see them, but in the category of final shared costs, there's still $40 million. These are things that are assumed to be shared costs truly and not able to be disaggregated. Things like the reserve fund or the stabilization fund are just shared costs. But you can see that the final town allocation of costs is 146 million and the final school allocation of costs is 232 million. And this is the sort of true percentage split. 10% of costs at the end of the day are shared costs no matter what, like these non-appropriated costs that are charges from the state. And 35% is town and 55% is school. Just to add the labels there as well. So with that said, I'm not sure I have more that I want to present at this point. What we want to do is take this and show it in graphical form. For example, show how revenue flows into each bucket. So you can see here that it's the same amount of money that's flowing in, but we have broken it out by how much of this is property tax versus free cash versus other available funds. And to make the numbers a little bit more palatable, and maybe this is a better chart for this group to look at, we've grouped it up by category. So, for example, you can see things like personnel benefits. This is the true split between the two. For example, unclassified, these are, hard costs, and these are how much live in town versus school. And so we can disseminate this to the group. I'm happy to take questions. But the goal here, once again, is to show you that we have this $419 million budget. We have this 177 million in shared costs, and we have, all of these other costs that are either below the line or in the budget, hidden somewhere in the split. And this is the true split of the money. I guess I would like to take questions from the committee if there's anything that's jumping out. It may be easier for me to stop screen share to take questions, but I'm going to leave it up for now. Would anybody like to jump in?
I had a question about the unclassified.
Sure.
Row 90, that's like more than 10% of the overall budget. So can you just explain why those are not in the category?
Why they're not in a category.
Well, they're in their own category, but unclassified is a pretty, murky thing. So
Sure. I can show you what's in each category here. So, unclassified things includes things like the reserve fund, stabilization fund, the affordable housing trust, our liability catastrophe, our insurance, the audit. There's a sizable chunk of money in unclassified that normally is not. It's a $970,000 amount that was placed there to be moved if the schools need it, by a town meeting budget amendment article. So that's not normally in there. But it is essentially
I see.
this category here. And it includes debt service. That's why you're seeing probably a huge number there, Jesse, because it includes debt service.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Other questions that are coming up? I know it's like this is again a blizzard of numbers, but I think what would be helpful right now is to hear confusion or things you'd like to see or things that are not jumping out you're expecting to jump out. We would like to revise this and make it useful to your subcommittee for thinking about these questions.
I can't really comment until I have a chance to take it home and look at it in depth, because it's a blizzard right now.
Great.
And I have to get my brain around what the numbers are to be able to say why here, not there.
Sure. Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. And I expect that you would have, I can expect that anybody might have questions after this, so we can come back. We can revisit this model at a later meeting.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. I feel the same way. I want to spend some time absorbing this.
Yeah, that's great.
The property tax line somewhere down around 80 or something.
Yes.
Yeah, 672. So is the 10, 35, 55, it doesn't look like that's applied to that. Is that a different split?
Yeah, great.
Applying the same percent split to to those columns?
That's a great question, Jesse. And the quick answer is no.
Yeah, I know. Because property taxes are one of those things that are going to be a huge output of our committee's work. I mean, not only the subcommittee, but the entire committee, in terms of an override if it's required. So people are going to focus. Property tax is going to be one of those things they're going to focus on big time.
Understood. And so what I will say about the revenue section, right, is this $419 million in revenue is really what we work with as a number. Certain things in here must go to certain revenues must go to certain uses. For example, the free cash is entirely going to special appropriations, so it lives in the shared cost column, right? So special appropriations includes the CIP. It lives under shared costs, so the entire thing is here. Under shared costs, we also have certain things that are always property tax financed, and that those include things like, I believe the financial policies of the town require that a certain amount of property tax go to certain things. So we have hard coded those in here, but the
Mhm.
rest of these are essentially they're essentially estimates, because beyond what is required by policy, we don't necessarily say, for example, that a certain amount of property tax goes to the town or to the schools. It's sort of so the way this breaks out is all of the free cash is going to the CIP. So that's here. We have certain items in this same column that are funded by policy by property tax. And then the remainder is these two are being split. The local receipts and state aid are being split 60-40.
Yeah.
And other available is almost entirely reimbursements from other funds, like the Water Enterprise Fund for their benefits and other similar reimbursements from those other funds. So that is pretty much staying under town. That's why we have it under town. And then town and school, as you'll see if we give you the spreadsheet, if you have the spreadsheet in front of you, is just the remainder. The property tax for town and school is just the remainder of what is left. So to try and explain it a little bit better, because I know what I just said was kind of a word salad. We have hard coded the numbers we know, which is free cash goes to CIP. Certain things under property tax go to certain items in this column. These are split 60-40, and town and school property tax are a catch-all for the remainder of what is left. In other words, Jesse, we don't sit down at the beginning of the year and take the $419 million and direct it into certain buckets. What we have done here is provide an estimate of how much of the $419 million is going into each of these boxes. Does that make sense? I hope I haven't added too much confusion, but the 419 million, it doesn't actually matter, for example, if the 14 million in local receipts here goes to town or it goes to schools. It's actually just the total number that matters. What we're doing is just trying to give you an abstraction of where the revenues are actually going.
And how far off is this? I should know this as a school committee member, but a lot of numbers floating around. In the total line that you're putting in for school, the 232, 469, how far away is that from the actual for this year? The $232 million for the school budget.
Well,
that-
the school. So it's Cliff. If you want to jump in and maybe clarify better, that's fine.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is that, and maybe it's not a relevant comment, but when there is an override, there are specific revenues that the voters give to the town and to the schools. So those, I would think, are part of that. But that's sort of hardwired year to year going forward, isn't it?
I agree, Cliff. And I would argue that those amounts are included in this catch-all that I've created.
Fair enough. Just, I guess I view those as sort of like a fixed number for each of those.
And you know what? And you know what? It wouldn't be hard for me to add some rows here and have property tax 2023 override. You know what I mean? As a row.
Yeah.
All it would do and you know what? That's good feedback. We could break out as many hard coded numbers as we know. You know what I mean? Like, for example, we may know that a certain amount went to the town or went to the schools as a result of the override. I will say that things have shifted, though, and that's part of maybe an issue with our current town school formula, is that as the override has been implemented, the funds have had to go through the financial policies and changed a little bit what the original allocation, how much each side was originally going to get. So it is a little bit, it may not be the best way to handle it. Okay.
It was just, the presentation just made me think of that. The other thing, I mean, for Jesse, if you look at 232 under funding sources and you just go up like 10 or 15 rows, you see the total up above, you see that 232 also under the schools. And that includes like all these things like debt service and healthcare, which are different and separate from the money that the school committee allocates in the budget you have.
Yeah, so the school committee allocation for FY26 is this $142,792,591 amount right here.
Correct.
The rest of the numbers in this column are in this fixed costs that comes off the top.
Right. Okay.
So I think what would be helpful, and I don't know, Cliff, were you done? Or
Yes, yes.
okay. Jesse, did you get your question answered around sort of what
Yes.
that number is? Okay. One of the things that I would think would be helpful is a view on, so this is very helpful, Charlie, thank you. And I would like to spend some time with it and send over my questions, but I think the view that would be helpful, and you could probably use this as a baseline to do that, is based on the recommendation that Chaz, you put forward, that we talked about over the last couple of meetings, moving, portion of these items below the line and keeping some above the line. Because this shows if everything was basically below the line, what would it look like, right? So what I'd love to see is, move the things we're proposing or that you're proposing would remain above the line, keep those above the line, and then do sort of a retroactive view of fiscal 25, 24, and 23, just by comparison. So that I think it would be helpful for me to look at that. And I think it would be helpful, and Jesse, you can correct me if I'm wrong, for the schools to understand, based on the proposal that's been put forward, what your budget would actually look like in the future, and then sort of thinking through what it would take to actually manage that. So I think you're like 80% of the way there,
No,
right?
no,
90% of the way there. But I think the actual number that the school would need to manage to in the future, plus the items that they would then need to manage or partner with the town to manage, is sort of the crux of what I think would precipitate a fruitful conversation, so that the schools can understand better or sort of think through better what the implications are. I also think that we should. Yeah, obviously, this subcommittee is made up of this smaller group. And also, I think we need to make sure that we have more active participation in these conversations from the school admin team, which obviously is limited, but they will know at a level that even Jesse, because you're not administrating these funds, even though you review the budget and approve the
Correct.
budget, or is one step in that approval process. I think it's important that we sit down and have participation from the fifth floor leaders, which I know has been challenging just given the staffing. But I think that's where we're going to get some really helpful insight.
So, so I just want to really quick, thank you, Siddharth. I appreciate
Yep.
those thoughts. Melissa is working on that model that you're looking for, which is to say, here's
Okay,
here's
great.
how the TSP actually works, and here's what it would look like if we made those changes. So not to sort of cut you off, but I think, or sort of, supplant what you just said, I guess. I think what you want to use this model for, or what I'm hoping that the subcommittee will use this model for, is to think about what things should or shouldn't live below the line
I see.
based
To sort
on
of
what we're
pressure
seeing.
test the recommendation. That's fair.
Right? Yeah.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
I think, or at least maybe you use it as a way to source ideas.
Yep.
Right. So Melissa will present that sheet, and I think it will be just as helpful as you're saying it will be, and probably more informative than this as far as making a decision goes.
Mhm.
But if you look at this, for example, you can see that as far as pensions and group health goes, for just to choose one example, group health is heavily school sided. It's, they have a much greater share of school group health expenses, but the town has a much greater share of pension expenses. And so that gives you an idea of what will happen when you necessarily when you pull those below the line.
Yep.
It will make those areas more volatile on each side, right?
Yep, that's fair.
And so the other things that this will do, I'm hoping, is provide an insight for the subcommittee members on, say, for example, how much of the public works budget is actually school-related expenses. It's almost 1.8 million, right? And so these are all costs for that, at least the ones that are in this section of this column,
Yep.
that currently are not being assessed to the schools. They're assumed to live in the split. That's how it works right now. It's part of the total fixed costs that come off the top, and so it's assumed to live in the split. That's something that Melissa has said at past meetings, but I think has not totally sunk in, and our goal was to show it to you here.
Yep.
So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Any other feedback that I can work into this? Because I think Cliff, I'm going to talk with Melissa about other ways we can hard code the revenue, so that it's a little bit more crystal clear. And we can also create versions of this that model out the below the line proposal too, Sadaf. So that can also be a follow-up. Any other thoughts?
I think that the thing that I would like to understand, and we can, tackle this in a subsequent meeting as well, is the mechanics, because I imagine that the school admin will also want to understand this. So just using group health as an example, right? So we're more heavily weighted towards the school, given, staffing and, maybe contract components. I'm actually not deeply familiar with the school teacher's contract. I'd like to understand better the like how you would operationalize this split, right? Because then group health would be partially below the line, and partially not above the line, but in the town's responsibility. So maybe that's all above the line. It's just, I'm sorry, it's all below the line. It's just split. But group health is sort of managed together, similar to buildings and other things we had talked about. I would like to understand how that actually gets operationalized in a way that isn't a tremendous amount of friction. I know we talked about the sort of MOU model, which will take time to set up and will still be messy. But perhaps Chaz, based on what you've learned and speaking with other town admin teams, if you could walk me through just an example of how this is operationalized in a way that is actually effective and more streamlined without creating a level of burden that, that just makes things way messier than they are today.
Yeah, and I think I'll let Charlie chime in here too, because I know, and then I see Cliff's hand is up. But I think, one of the big things here from our perspective is a lot of this stuff is handled. For example, when I think about healthcare costs and so forth, like some of the benefits are definitely handled on the HR side. But there is a structure in place to administer HR issues from the school side, and that's an area where we're not recommending a consolidation of services necessarily because of the specialized nature of the work that goes on there. So it is kind of a case by case basis, but I definitely have some examples of how different models, and obviously because the biggest ticket item here is public buildings. That's the area where I focused a lot of my conversations with other communities. So, there are a lot of different ways to operationalize these sorts of things without causing undue burden. And a lot of that really comes down to having concrete policies in place, wherever the potential points of friction are, making sure that there is a governing document that the parties can continually go back to, say, okay, this lays out the roles and responsibilities. There's no room for saying, well, I thought you were going to do that. That's really the kicker that underlies all of the conversations I have with other communities. Charlie, you wanted to chime in here?
Yeah, thank you, Chaz. So I just wanted to say, great question, Sadaf, and I think we should ask that for all of these potential changes to the split, right? But group health did used to live below the line in Brookline, and it wasn't that long ago. It was actually in the last several years, I think that change was made to move it above the line.
And why and sorry to interrupt you, but why was it moved above the line?
Yeah, I think that it had to do, I would need Melissa to answer based on the history. All I can recall is that around 2018-19, there was some work with the schools and it was decided to move it above the line. But when it lived below the line, it worked exactly as it did now, which is that the town has a consultant that we work with through the GIC to get our group health rates, and each side had its own budget and was responsible for managing its own budget. And we would meet. I would assume that there would be more school involvement in in hearing the projections for costs, because now it's not just a database managed by Melissa. It's two different databases. But at the same time, it literally just becomes the same handing down of rates we get now and comparing it against the budget we have, except instead of doing that on one side and communicating back and forth, it would be two sides with their own budgets to manage, their own line items to manage. So right now, it actually may be more cumbersome for the town than than if it was below the line right now, the way that it stands.
And so just so I understand, Cliff, I know you're waiting, but I have a follow-up to this, which is that so then, for example, with like the next round of budget or contract negotiations with teachers, then the schools would have this as sort of one of the levers to manage, either up or down, right? And understand and sort of bear the burden or lack of burden of the cost implications for this specifically, right?
I actually may not be the best person to answer that question, Sadaf.
I would let Anne chime in there, and then I want
If she's able, yeah. Nicole, you may need to promote Anne Braga so she can chime in.
And Cliff is, I think, like
Chomping at the bit.
edge of, yeah, exactly. Really wants to say something, so.
But I think, yeah, go ahead, Anne, now that you're unmuted. Thank you.
So, Anne Braga, HR Director for the town. So the costs for employees and for the town for health insurance under group health is defined by a public employee commission that is made up of representatives of all the unions as well as the retirees and town administration. And we cannot define a different payout or pay percentage for different, in this case, schools versus town. It has to be sort of all for one and one for all as far as the percentage on the health insurance plans. We can define different percentages for our indemnity plans versus our POS and PPS, which are traditional sort of health insurance models. And we can define a different amount for retirees, but it is very limited by state law as far as what activity we can do. And I know that the cost share is a subject for discussion for PEC when we do meet as a group. So that wouldn't be covered in traditional collective bargaining, but it would be done through the collaborative bargaining of the PEC.
I see. So the schools, even though they would have that on their books, so to speak, that is not a lever for them.
Exactly.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Go ahead, Cliff. Thank you for waiting.
Yeah, sure. I would just add to that last discussion that the schools have the largest share of the vote in that group. They have over 50%, I believe. And so if anything's going to happen there, which some of us have been talking about for 10 plus years, the schools, the teachers union would have to agree. And so to the extent that it can be used as a discussion point, that's absolutely where you want to go with that. The other thing, two other things. So Charlie, I think and Sadaf, I think the issue of moving things above the line, it really came from some work that BFAC did, where the conclusion was, let's just simplify things and just, that brought us to this whole 60-40 split. It was just an easier way of doing it. At least it seemed that way at the time. Sadaf, I think you raised a really important question. And I want to go back, at least for me, to one of the things that Chaz said when he talked about this, which was, that by having things below the line, it may provide a better understanding on behalf of the school committee, maybe the administration as well, as to the decisions that they're making, because they're seeing all the costs that are involved, at least on the personnel side. And so I can understand the rationale for doing that. At the same time, let's talk about the trash, okay, or public works. We're not going to be disaggregating that, right? We're not going to be having the schools incur separate costs because they're not going to have the employees. So I'm actually kind of curious and maybe this comes back to the question that Chaz and Charlie have asked, like what makes sense to go below the line or not. I'm just wondering, all those things that are deemed incurred on behalf of the schools, I'm not sure we're going to be in a position to want to give the revenue to the schools, because then they're probably not going to want to incur those costs, even though they need to be incurred. So that, I mean, that's part of the discussion I think that we're going to need to have.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there, you know, in other communities, right, the DPW issue is really one of like groundskeeping, right? Well, it's two things. It's groundskeeping and it's fees. You know, historically, sanitation fees ran through the split until they didn't. You know, so now in the last couple of years, the sanitation fee has not run through the split, and that's created this two-tiered system where you've got basically two different, you know, that we're treating one source of revenue two different ways. And that's not particularly efficient. But when I look at other communities' models, it is a model very similar to the one we have for the buildings department, which is there is groundskeeping and there is an assessment for groundskeeping. And that assessment is dealt with at the budgetary level, and it's not necessarily something, you know, again, it depends on the community. In some communities where there is an above the line model or a shared revenues, shared expenditures model, sorry. Groundskeeping is controlled as part of the public buildings division or public buildings department that is then jointly controlled by the town and the schools. In other models closer to ours, it's much more, you know, groundskeeping is in public works provides the service, or it's in public buildings. Sometimes public buildings takes on groundskeeping responsibilities. And then there's an assessment to the school department or the school district for the work that's provided in those cases. And then in all those cases, there are parameters for how those costs are assessed, you know, what the actuals are, and how they can be, how they go up or down depending there. But, you know, to Cliff's point, right, you know, the whole issue that we're encountering is the one that the schools encountered in the rounds of budget cuts that the school committee had to go through, which were very painful because you don't want to spend money on anything that isn't education, is directly educational student-facing services. There's a lot of pressure to cut things elsewhere. And when those cuts elsewhere come home to roost, there's a lot of danger there. But in the immediate term, there is this sort of pressure to say, well, we got to cut something else. And then, you know, you see the practical results of that. I mean, even in this meeting today, to the point you raised, you know, the fact that no one is here from the staff on the school side is because no one has left. You know, it's an unfortunate reality that when you narrow the, you know, the cost elsewhere, the natural result is something like this. And so it's part of that discussion that we have to circle back to, which is in the same way that there are services that must be provided educationally, there are services that are not educational services that must be provided too. You know, someone has to fix the roofs and someone has to cut the grass. And so how do you create a system that ensures that that gets done and that those functions are insulated from the difficult kinds of political pressure that can come on in those situations where there's a strong push to, you know, cut anything but that. I just keep going back to our and I can't remember who it was. I think it was Dr. Schmuckler, you know, talking about the paraprofessional services in primary school, talking about how we provide above and beyond what other communities do, and that the loss of one position would not result in a negative educational impact to students. But, you know, those are the kinds of conversations. I'm sorry, Janet, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to find the yellow hand on this.
That's all right.
Basically, we're balancing two things. One is visibility to the budget holders, which I think is really important with benefits, because it is part of their cost structure, and with it above the line, I don't think they see it. They see it costs me 75,000, sorry, I'm making numbers up, to hire this teacher. But that 75 brings a cost with it that they're not conscious of, and that impacts how you budget. The other thing is what Chaz was saying. We also have to make sure that all the required costs for the town, whether on the town side or the school side, get done. And that means maintaining our buildings, maintaining the grounds. And it can't be subject to, we would like to put in a new program which would enhance the education that these students get. It would be like saying we're not going to put heat in town hall because we want to hire additional IT staff. It just doesn't function that way. So I think with the detail we've gotten from Charlie, which I could barely see, I'll be able to go back and define, because we forget the budget, the buckets. Charlie knows them by heart. Melissa knows them by heart. Cliff probably does because of his role on AC, and I used to, but things changed. But to look at all of those things and make that assessment, what needs visibility to the budget holder and what needs certainty for the best functioning of the whole town. And that's certainly the way that I'm going to be looking at it.
I will just add on this, and it goes back to something that Cliff said at the town school partnership meeting last week, which is, I think, one of the recommendations that this committee can make involves the role of the town school partnership and the engagement level that needs to happen from all the participants there. I do think we have seen over the years, unfortunately, and again, it is what it is, right? I think the history of it is there are many reasons for why it is the way it is now, but the level of detail and policy shaping at the town school partnership has really decreased, and that can be and should be reversed. And I think as part of this conversation, one of the things that needs to happen is the discussion of what role does the town school partnership play in all of this? How does that body function? What are the expectations, and what are the deliverables? I think clear expectations on the town school partnership that, for example, agreements on shared services should be delivered and reviewed in a timely fashion, is mission critical to the ultimate success of whatever is decided here. Because any model, I think as the CLA report shows, even when you have controls in place, any model is only as good as the people who follow it. And so, having clear responsibilities laid out and being able to utilize town school partnership when a committee like this does not exist, to do that work is going to be really critical. So the material that Charlie put together is now in your packet. We will circulate it at the end of this meeting. Again, I am trying to get us out of this habit of delivering stuff to you at the meeting, and I apologize that is still the case this week, but we are going to make every effort to make that not the case. It's just, as you know, with folks out, it being August, we're running as best we can to get things to you at the speed that we can. And we do really need to pick up on our end the pace of that. And that's on me. And so I will ensure that going forward, we have a better handle on getting those materials to you as we turn into fall here. But you have that spreadsheet. We will send you the Excel file. You'll be able to look at that. And to the point that Sadaf and Janet raised, kind of think about where that visibility and requirement is necessary. I'm sorry, Sadaf, go ahead.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. So I know that you had and your team had laid out a timeline for recommendations and kind of when we would get to a committee level recommendation. given the holidays as well as the backstop around the select board meeting and the election. I assume this needs to be this discussion needs to be coupled with that.
Yes,
Okay, but to sort of ratify these recommendations, I mean, I just want to pressure test that assumption around, we're not sort of working towards a May election for this particular piece necessarily, but I guess this is an input to how you would use the budget.
correct.
But I do think that there are some things in this process that will probably require additional time, right? The updated MOUs, sort of a revised administrative structure, sort of how you again operationalize that. I use that term a lot, but there's a reality around how you get from like the theory to
Yep.
to making it work that I don't want to underestimate, also given the staffing. And so I just want to raise that as a potential a time investment that I'm wondering, does the school admin have time to tackle that in this timeline as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the answer in terms of deliverables from this committee, I think this subcommittee are a recommendation on revenue sharing model, and a recommendation on what services we believe should be shared, and potential models for how that would happen. But what's not necessary is draft MOUs or, the work of that. That work is going to really take months beyond this and is not tied into the election or the potential of an override on the ballot.
It just means a transition to sort of that new model could take quite a bit longer.
Yes,
Right.
that's right. That's absolutely right. But I think that's important for us to kind of think through. Just the expectations here are high level, and focused on this question of
What's shared, what's not, et cetera. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. And again, I think it would have been useful to hear from the school admin around like what would it take to make that transition? What's that timeline? What would that look like? Which we can add that to our list of.
Yeah, I know that, for example,
that.
school team is an offsite today, and I'm due to meet with them following up on TSP later this week. So
Great.
I will talk to them and we will try and get some coordination on the schedule.
All right, thank you.
Other questions, members of the panel? Okay, we will reach out to you for scheduling on this. And just to give you a sense of where the timeline, how this intersects, I would love it if this panel could make a recommendation to the broader group now, based on what we know about the school timeline, by the first week of October. The thought there being we will have school, that's the week that the school enrollment numbers will come out. And so that will be kind of one of the final pieces of the data puzzle. And with the schools open, hopefully the school team will have some time to address the issue, and some of the other outstanding data questions, so that concurrently with that discussion at the full committee, you also then have the opportunity to present this on revenue sharing, get any questions answered from the schools on that front, and make a concrete recommendation. So that's the kind of revised timeline for deliverables here, is the first week of October.
Okay, so then I think that our going into the next meeting for this subcommittee, we need sort of the data that Melissa is working on. Obviously, we'll spend some time with the spreadsheet that Charlie put together. And then I think we would need to both answer questions and have a fairly robust discussion on what is above and below the line in the presence of the school admin.
Got it.
To then come up with a recommendation. So whatever that next meeting is, I think it's probably likely more than an hour. And then would need to include the right people in our virtual or real room.
Understood. Are there any other pieces of data or information now that subcommittee members would like from us in advance of that meeting? And again, this is not your only call for it. I just want to make sure that we have that now so that we can get to work on things. Okay, as you go through the material that Charlie provided you, please reach out to us with any follow-ups you have, and we will get you any additional information you need.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Yep, see you tomorrow.
See you
Yep.
tomorrow.
Yep.
Everybody,
Thanks a lot.
bye.
Bye-bye.